We are going to war. We are going to war, and it's going to get ugly. It is very possible that we are going to see the absolute worst manifestations of human violence that the world has ever seen, the most atrocious and deplorable acts fueled by some of the most fervent, radically charged fanatics that the world has ever seen. I can only hope that this is going to be succeeded by the best that humanity has to offer, as typically is the case throughout history. We go through these periods where it's a long trudge through the dark, only to emerge on the other side when the sun rises once again. But I regret to inform you that every leading indicator that I have gleaned over the past few weeks points towards a major conflagration ensuing in the Middle East and ultimately ensnaring the rest of the world, acting as a crux, a crucible, a pivot point for the great East-West divide. A battleground versus East and West happening in the Holy Land. You can't make this stuff up. Now, this is not a time to panic, okay? This is a time to dust off whatever preparedness plans that you might have shelved and to finalize those plans. This is not a time to freak out. This is not a time to fuel the fire by partaking in whatever sort of dichotomy they've put in front of us to divide us with now. This is a time to focus on preparedness. And yes, you guessed it, I'm taking my own advice here. I'm preaching to myself in this video because it's very easy to get caught up in the forums and get in arguments with people that are going to benefit nobody but bring what we're talking about here today closer and more certain. So now is a time to prep with urgency, but do so methodically. It is a time to prep with urgency, but also do so carefully. And this doesn't mean making hasty decisions, especially, of course, if you've been a prepper for a long time, then obviously I'm preaching to the choir here. But I think beyond a shadow of a doubt, they're going to go to war in the Middle East. Now, how far that war spreads is anybody's best guess. But every possible data point that I've come across points towards that very thing. And it's very important that you do not succumb to making the first mistake. One of the first rules of war is never taking anybody at their word. No matter what the side, even if it's the opposing side or your own side, do not take them at their word. Right now, Biden is allegedly going to Israel on Wednesday as a show of solidarity. Now, this could be interpreted in numerous ways. It could be interpreted as he's going there in order to act as a deterrent, so to prevent Hezbollah, to show the commitment to Israel, which I don't think they have to do at this point. I think everybody in the Middle East gets how synonymous Israel is with the United States in terms of their geopolitical interests, and how Israel is essentially there over and above all of the religious motivations. It's essentially there to police the Middle East with nuclear weapons. That's its primary function, okay? And this is something that they're not going to concede, because if they concede that, it's over for the U.S. empire. Now, the other way of looking at this is that this Biden visit is just a ruse. It's just a ruse, and that they're going to do the Gaza invasion and Biden's not going to go, because they're not going to do a Gaza invasion before Biden goes there, because the security alerts would just be too high. Currently, it is not yet rated as a do not travel destination, in spite of the fact that numerous countries, including Canada, are starting to call their citizens home from surrounding countries like Lebanon. Just today, Canada issued a do not travel advisory to Lebanon. Okay, that's a sign that war is coming. It's pretty much inevitable. In fact, war is already happening on the border. Israel is using incendiary munitions on the border with Lebanon. Incendiary munitions, if you don't know, are a prohibited weapon under international law if used in areas where civilians might be present. So if there's a military target in and around civilians, you are prohibited by law of using incendiary munitions. This has not stopped them before. It's likely not going to stop them in the future. Now, how is this exactly going to play out? Who benefits from this? Well, I'm going to break it all down today. But there's one thing you need to understand here, and it's that Iran wants this war too, I do believe. If you didn't know, the popularity of the Iranian leader, not the Ayatollah, not the supreme leader, but their president, is not very good. In fact, it's around 23%. And you'll notice that across the majority of the world, with the exception of Vladimir Putin for some reason, if we can believe those numbers, which, whatever, maybe it's 50-50, jury's still out on that. With the exception of Vladimir Putin, in times of economic contraction and austerity and everything we've been through for the last 3 years, the popularity of any politician is not good right now. And the best thing to unify your population is a rally around the flag, is a rally around national security. You start a war, it takes attention away from domestic issues, it gives people a common sense of purpose, it realigns, it consolidates, and this is a way to prevent an uprising. Of course, Iran has had its share of coup attempts, subversive tactics employed by Western intelligence in order to topple the regime there. All have failed, much like they failed in pretty much everywhere else where they've attempted this, which is why we always inevitably have to go to war. So that is what is happening. I do believe that Iran does, in some way, shape, or form, want a war, in the same way that we want a war. Let's face it, Joe Biden, not very popular. Benjamin Netanyahu, one of the least popular leaders in a Western country, if you can call, a Western ideologically aligned country like Israel, aside the democracy part and the freedom of speech part, for the most part. Well, I guess that's pretty much a symptom of all of our failing democracies, or republics, as some people like to call some of them. But understand that there is a war coming to the Middle East. It is going to ensnare the entirety of the planet, and we're all going to get involved, and it's going to get ugly. I do believe that we haven't seen anything yet when it comes to seeing the worst of humanity. The Third World War could bring out evil that is just untold levels of indiscriminate psychopathy, sadism, because a lot of this is going to happen remotely, and that's the problem. Back in the day, you had to actually look across from the guy across from you and cut his head off with a sword. You don't have to do that anymore, and that's part of the problem. If you want to read a good book by Colonel Grossman, it's called On Killing. It's why human beings, we are not made to kill each other, okay? It is not in our nature, contrary to popular belief. It is not conducive to evolutionary posterity to murder each other in a savage way. So when we do this, we get traumatized, we get PTSD. It's not supposed to happen. And I think the Nazis in World War II, they had that problem, which is why they had to bring in things like gas chambers, because the guys just couldn't deal with it. It became, it messed them up. So unfortunately, because all our killing is done remotely, I think we're going to see some things that are just unimaginable when this war really kicks off. All the data points today that I have to go over are probably things that you've already heard before. However, I always provide my own unique analysis. I don't just read the news articles and the headlines. Anybody can do that. Anybody can go on Twitter and read that stuff. I try to interpret this stuff. And one of the things that I'm not hearing is the fact that Iran does stand to benefit from this conflict. And that as much as people think it would be a one-sided affair, which it would be if the US or Israel decided to use nuclear weapons, however, we don't know the true status of Iran's nuclear arsenal. As I'm going to talk about today, we also have Pakistan's nuclear arsenal to contend with, albeit a smaller arsenal, we're not necessarily sure why there are nuclear sniffer planes flying around Pakistan for the last couple weeks. It's probably because somebody somewhere is concerned that maybe there's a possibility that a nuclear weapon is deployed from that direction. And I should add, we have a story today that talks about how a son of a politician is calling for the use of Pakistan's nuclear weapons in defense of the Palestinians. You also have Ben Shapiro, as I'm going to talk about today, calling for the utilization of the Samson clause, I believe it's called, or the Samson strategy, the Samson option. And that is the name for the deployment of Israel's nuclear weapons. Now, is Biden going to Israel just a ruse? Is just a stopgap to try to prevent the mobilization or deter Hezbollah surrounding regions from attacking Israel? Is it going to prevent a Gaza invasion? No, it is not. Is it going to create this illusion of good cop, bad cop for the rest of the world, this dog and pony show to check a box? Yes, because now Israel will have to allow the aid into Gaza, which is much needed, which is going to be likely too little and too late for many, unfortunately. They've still evacuated the north, and they're going to continue with their incursions into the north now that 2,000 U.S. troops are en route to provide medical support. The IDF has hundreds of thousands of soldiers that are battle ready. Hundreds of thousands. Sure, many of them are reserves, but they've all had the training, and they have a sizable enough population that 2,000 U.S. troops are not really going to be making a significant contribution in the grand scheme of things. What are these troops going there for? They are going there to mission creep into this conflict. Understand the level of involvement that this is compared to anything that we've done in Ukraine. Sending 2,000 troops into Ukraine immediately raises the specter of nuclear conflict in that region. This almost guarantees that one of those troops is going to get clipped. We're going to hear about American casualties, and that is going to only increase people's support for this conflict. And right now, according to some polls, over 75% of the American public support a war in the Middle East. And that is for a variety of purposes. There's a certain evangelical demographic that has their own motivations for supporting this conflict. There are people who support the Israeli cause. And it's just a new enough thing. And of course, the flashbulb memory of the atrocities that were committed by Hamas have been etched into everybody's mind. And that is going to be fueled by the military-industrial complex. There's nothing they love more. They're never, ever going to let an opportunity like this go to waste. They've seen what they were able to do with Ukraine, where they had the backing of the majority. And I don't even think that as many people supported Ukraine as do Israel right now. So they're going to ride that until the wheels fall off. Okay? They are not going to relent on this until the popularity for the war drops under 50%. Then they'll start curtailing it. Until that time, it's a green light. And right now, we're going to send troops in there. They're going to be cannon fodder. They're going to get in the line of fire. I'm not saying that's the plan, but that's what's going to happen. And then when we start seeing Americans coming back in body bags, that's when the United States is going to say, okay, now we have to fight Hezbollah. And they've been fighting Hezbollah on the border as we speak with those incendiary munitions, as I've been talking about. They are utilizing incendiary weapons on the border with Israel and Lebanon. Lebanon, of course, distancing itself from Hezbollah. Regardless, that has not stopped the Canadian government from issuing an evacuation alert for Lebanon, a level 4 travel advisory. Do not travel to Lebanon, according to the Canadian government. Hasn't been done yet in the United States. There is a reconsider travel, but not a do not travel. So the battle is already starting in Lebanon. and understand how these wars start. In Vietnam, for example, the Vietnam War started with about 1,000 troops one year. And then the next year it was 5,000. Then 10,000 the next year. Then 50,000. Then before you knew it, it was a full-scale declaration of war. Okay, but long before that, you had a troop presence. The problem here is that Israel is severely outgunned when it comes to a fight, a conventional war with Hezbollah. They don't believe they can win. When you factor in Syria, you factor in Lebanon, you factor in all of the various factions who are fighting with these groups, Hamas and in Iraq, as well as, of course, Iran. They don't believe they can win that fight. And no matter how much firepower the United States brings to bear, they cannot defeat Iran with conventional weapons. You cannot defeat a fort from a fleet. You just don't have the resupply capability. You don't have the amount of troops in place. It's a huge logistical thing. And right now, apparently, U.S. recruitment is down, but they've been offering people $50,000 bonuses for the past year. And that's not a coincidence. So, the data that we need to talk about today, the Iran Foreign Ministry has taken action in the recent hours. They're saying that in the coming hours, okay, in the coming hours, this was before Biden said that he was going to Israel. They were saying that if actions were not taken, then they're going to go to war, or they're effectively going to, in some capacity, enter this conflict. And then lo and behold, just a few hours later, Biden says that he's going to Israel and they're going to allow for aid to come into Gaza. Not making a concession, not saying that they're not going to invade the north. It's just been temporarily postponed, because I highly doubt they're going to do it before he gets there, because that would, then you end up possibly getting in a shooting match before that. This is an attempt to delay, and I think it's an attempt to buy time. And the question is, are they actually going to respect this, or are they going to start attacking anyways? What happens if they start attacking? What happens if Biden is rushed to a bomb shelter? Is that what they're going for here? Is that what we're going to see? If I was a betting man, I would bet that it's very likely that we're going to hear the headline, Biden, taken to bomb shelter. Didn't Blinken have that same thing today? But think of the optics of that. Okay, that's exactly the optics they're probably going for. And then right when Biden leaves, they're going to light it up. Now, is it strategic to have Biden there? Probably, because if we exist in this world where politicians are actually the ones calling the shots, then it starts to appear as though there is a very strong bond between Israel and the United States, which is unwavering. Unless the other side is wise to our tricks, which they probably are at this point. I mean, is it any surprise that on the day all this is going down, the United States has made a proposition to Russia to restart the New START treaty? Do you really think Russia, in their right mind, at a time when every one of those countries, China, the United States, and Russia, and neither side is going to do this because China is not joining in on this. So it's really just put there to create the illusion of an attempt to try to broker some sort of deal. But do you really think Russia is going to be buying this when we violated Minsk agreements, when we violated every possible agreement and promise that we've had with them, or any country for that matter, is going to look at this and they're not going to believe a single word we're saying? So I would not be surprised if all of these militia groups associated with the IRGC, the Iranian military, I would not be surprised if they're not even taking this literally. They probably don't even believe Biden's going to show up. And if they do, they probably don't care. These groups don't care about the use of nuclear weapons. It hasn't dissuaded them in the past. There's been several conflicts in the Middle East ensued, times when the United States went to war with these countries. They're not concerned about the United States using weapons. But if Israel feels threatened, if their existence feels threatened, they will utilize the Samson option, which is the use of nuclear weapons. It's very similar to Russia's nuclear doctrine. If they feel their existence is under threat, they will use nuclear weapons. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to immediately do so in a manner which is targeting any specific country, maybe not even in the military. It might be a demonstrative strike, just a show of force, a deterrent, but it's a possibility. Iranian's parliament speaker says that the upcoming Israeli invasion of the Gaza Strip will open the gates of hell upon Israel and its military. That is a verbatim quote. They also say that the Zionist regime is crumbling and that its collapse is inevitable. Again, this is something that many would find unthinkable, that Israel could ever collapse. If Israel collapses, America is finished. This is their strongman in the Middle East that essentially polices the Middle East with nuclear weapons. Let's be real about that. That, above any other religious motivations, any sort of Zionist motivations, political, religious, above all that, it is for the purpose of having a presence in the Middle East, which is undefeatable because they will use nuclear weapons. So it has to be that way because that's where all the oil is. That's where all the natural gas is. That's where a lot of the resources are. And from what I know, it's not only the Iranians and the Iraqi groups and the Syrians that the United States fears. It's also the Saudis. See, nobody really trusts each other. I got a message today from someone who insists that the Saudis actually played a role in the development of the Pakistani nuclear program. And as such, they've done this so that should the need arise, they could have access to that weaponry. And of course, as I made abundantly clear yesterday in my daily update, with a theocracy, it's absolutely essential in order to maintain control of your population that if you want to maintain that legitimate role as a theocrat, like the Ayatollah, if he wants to remain in charge, he has to come to the aid of Muslims who are in need. And if they neglect that, then they risk true riots in the streets from the better part of their population, which are religious. Now, there's a very large secular population in Iran as well, but there still is a very large religious population, and we are seeing worldwide outpouring of support for Palestine, the likes of which we've never seen before. We are seeing an unfolding of violence in the streets, stabbings, shootings, and that is only going to ramp up. And no, that actually wasn't Hamas, that was ISIS. These are two different organizations, distinctly different organizations. Do they both share some views around religious fundamentalism? I'm sure they do. But Hamas is an organization which was created, I'm not going to get into the origins of it because it's controversial, but primarily as a political tool, as a political party, if you will, to resist what they perceive to be an occupation, which is, for all intents and purposes, an occupation of sorts. But that story goes back and back and back. ISIS is more of a, they're more of like the caliphate. They want the Muslim one world government or whatever, take us all to the afterlife with them or whatever. It's a little bit different. They're not the same. They're different groups. They actually fight with one another. But that's not the point. The point is we're seeing levels of division in society right now that not only do we have to contend with a war developing that is going to ensnare all the major superpowers in some way, shape, or form and is going to exacerbate all the other conflicts that are going on. It's not going to make the war between Russia and Ukraine better. It's going to make it a lot worse. It's going to make the stakes much higher, okay? We're also going to have to contend with domestic violence. We're also going to have to contend with now a government crackdown. The government is going to be breathing down our necks. What sort of individual rights and freedoms do you think they're going to come after now? That is the question. They're coming for them. The Iranian foreign minister said, if we do not defend Gaza today, in the future we will be forced to deal with the phosphorus bombs in our hospitals used by the Zionist regime. He stated that the Israeli regime will be gone soon and the Palestinian nation will be victorious in the final battle to liberate Palestine. A large official international broadcasting radio network of Iran today said that the victory of God is near. Allah. The victory of Allah is near, according to what they're saying. So again, it's important to remember that not many people are talking about how the Iranian government benefits from sowing this unrest, and it's almost probably wanting to be attacked at this point. As crazy as that sounds, the Iranians stand to benefit from a direct attack by the Israelis at this point in time, because they're dealing with their own economy, which has been heavily sanctioned. Before the conflict with Russia, Iran was far and away one of the most sanctioned nations on earth. So their economy is struggling. They are in a state of arrested development as a result of these sanctions. And now we got Lloyd Austin saying that they're ready to deploy 2,000 troops in a non-combative role. Sure, buddy, sure. We also have the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit, along with the USS Bataan, an aircraft carrier, consisting of the USS Mesa Verde and the USS Carter Hall, and 4,000 sailors and Marines have been ordered to the Mediterranean. We're talking about 5 or 6 aircraft carriers, potentially in and around this region, if I read that correctly. So they are preparing for a very, very large and long war. All the telltale signs are there. Anthony Blinken visited Kiev just a few weeks before the invasion started. Anthony Blinken visited Israel today and met with Netanyahu for approximately 8 hours. So you know that there was deliberation there. You know that this wasn't just, okay, we're doing this according to plan. Something is not going according to plan when you meet with somebody for 8 hours. We have Egypt on their border. Apparently, there was a ceasefire, while Israel denies that there was a ceasefire. Apparently, through some channels, it was determined that there was, in fact, a brief ceasefire allowed between Egypt and Israel to allow goods to flow into the Gaza Strip, okay? Goods. Now, why would Egypt want to risk sending weapons to Hamas through the border and risk getting into a war with Israel at this point in time? It just doesn't make any sense. And why would Israel bomb the only exits that all the foreign nationals had to leave from? Anyways, now Biden has made an agreement with Netanyahu that those people get to leave and aid gets to come in. And then once Biden leaves, which is, he's going to be going there Wednesday, which means tomorrow, is when that's effectively going to happen, which is, 48 hours from now, not even, like 36 hours from now. That's probably when the war is going to start. Because now they can say, we did what we needed to do, and we appeared humanitarian to alleviate some of the blowback and the criticisms that they've been receiving, but I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's going to work. Apparently, the IDF is currently doing patrols throughout the West Bank, armed patrols, full-scale martial law type stuff, okay? This is in the West Bank, where while there is protest there, as far as I know, there is no equivalent uprising, and Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, the West Bank is rather complacent with the demands of Israel, but that situation could blow up very, very quickly as well. Is Biden just being sent there to act as a human shield, to bait out? I mean, how enticing is that going to be? to have Joe Biden there for Hezbollah or Hamas. And why would he go there? Okay, this is the question. I mean, right now you have every country evacuating their citizens. They're even evacuating their citizens from Lebanon now. The only do not travel part of the country is on the border with Lebanon. Why on earth would he feel the need to go there, aside to do some kind of Biden runs into the bunker photo op? Yes, it's a show of solidarity, but nobody doubts the unity of Israel and the United States interests. They're perfectly aligned. There is no country, especially in the Middle East, who has any doubts about whether or not the United States will come to the aid of Israel if it's required. So, who are they doing this for? Is this just for the Western audience? Something to keep in mind, anytime you see a report in one of these countries that we're at war with, anytime they get an English-speaking spokesperson to do it, and the main language is not English, that's how you know they're trying to send you a programmed message. Okay, that's one of the easiest ways to determine. And to me, this seems like a spectacle, not for the Middle East, but for us. And that doesn't bode well for the prospect of conflict. We have mass evacuations out of Lebanon. Like I said, there was an Israeli strike on Damascus once again today. According to Swiss International Airlines, they're going to be suspending flights to Beirut come October 28th. Now, Swiss neutrality, does that make them privy to some secret intel that we don't know? I don't know. But why October 28th? Why the delay? Why not right now is the question. But on October 28th, they are going to cease operations in Lebanon. That's a big tell. Colombia has expelled the Israeli ambassador. That is huge. Even though Colombia, small country in the global south, they've expelled the Israeli ambassador. That says a lot. Okay? That's sending a message. I think there's even been people speaking out in the Spanish parliament with respect to what's happening in Gaza right now. So, they probably expected an outpouring of support from these atrocious acts that were committed by Hamas. I think they overplayed their hand a little bit in terms of the indiscriminate nature with which they are attempting to fight this guerrilla group who's hiding amongst the civilian population. Justifiably, yes. You should expect some collateral damage, but the wholesale destruction that we've seen, something that we've not seen in any city in Ukraine, with the exception of Bakhmut, and quite frankly, even Bakhmut doesn't look as bad as many places in Gaza, it is just on a whole other level. And the division is scary. The quickness, the speed at which everybody turned on each other who were just weeks prior, viewing themselves along common lines, are now fighting. I mean, the most recent one is Kim Iverson and David Rubin. Of course, there's the whole Ben Shapiro, Andrew Tate. There's all, this rift now is forming. You can't tell me that that's not benefiting somebody. Hezbollah is ready and mobilizing their troops towards the Lebanese border. That war has pretty much already started. It just hasn't exploded yet. And there's definitely, Hezbollah is sharing videos of them blowing up Israeli tanks, these very well-produced videos. So that this is a distinguished organization, which is not to compliment them on what they're doing or in no way support what they're doing, but this is a professional fighting force, a tough, hardened fighting force that the Israelis are going to have to contend with, and most people think they don't want to. Most people think that in an attempt to avoid a conventional war with Hezbollah and their dreaded hundreds of thousands of rockets, that they're just going to do a nuclear strike and exercise the Samson option so it doesn't come to that. I guess we'll wait and see. Lebanon's militant Hezbollah group said it has started destroying surveillance cameras on several Israeli army posts along the border as tensions continue to rise. They're also evacuating numerous villages. The Lebanese and the Israelis are evacuating many villages along the border there. Now, as I was saying, Ben Shapiro is calling for the use of the Samson option. What is the Samson option? But before we do that, we should talk about I think I'm probably going to mispronounce this, but the Dahia doctrine. The Dahia doctrine is a military strategy of asymmetric warfare outlined by former Israeli Defense Forces Chief of General Staff Gadi Eisenkot, which encompasses the destruction of civilian infrastructure of regimes deemed to be hostile as a measure calculated to deny combatants the use of that infrastructure, and endorses the employment of disproportionate force to secure that end. Now, some people might think that this doctrine that I just read you violates pretty much every Geneva Convention that there is out there. And you would probably be right, but I guess calling it a doctrine makes it okay. Now, regardless, this Samson option is perfectly in line with the Dahia doctrine, which again allows for the destruction of civilian infrastructure of regimes deemed to be hostile. Now, they don't say targeting civilians, but when you target civilian infrastructure, in the videos that I've seen the IDF gloating about, there's clearly cars driving by, there's people coming out of the buildings. So they're not alerting everybody in these buildings, and not everybody's going to get the memo. And of course, if you're alerting people, then it kind of defeats the purpose, right? If you're alerting people that, hey, we're going to destroy this building, and you think that there's terrorists in there, well, why would you tell them? So it's a tough situation. It really does require a full-scale ground invasion. They don't want to do that because they're casualty averse. They don't want to suffer the consequences. They don't want to have people coming home in body bags, so they use their disproportional amount of force in order to hopefully destroy the terrorists, but at the same time, you end up taking out 100 civilians. And then now what you've done is every time you take out a civilian, you create 5 or 6 of their family members. You turn them into hardliners who want nothing more for the rest of their life but to seek revenge for the people that they've lost. This is why they've lost in Vietnam. This is why we lose every single war against an asymmetrical fighting force. It was funny to me when, remember when we left all that stuff for the Taliban? I was thinking to myself, like all that military equipment, everybody was saying, oh, this is such a big mistake and all this. And then you had the Taliban pretending like they were an actual, army, where a regimented style of army. And I was thinking to myself, is this some 4D chess move? Because the only reason why the Taliban actually were able to defeat us, or at least not be erased, is because of their guerrilla warfare tactics. Now that they're all in tanks, it's easy picking. So anyways, just another observation that I've had. Maybe you guys have had similar observations. So maybe they're going to go back once the Taliban builds up their army and then defeat them conventionally with ease, when they forget how to fight in the mountains. The Samson option is the name that some military analysts and authors have given to Israel's deterrent strategy of massive retaliation with nuclear weapons as a last resort against a country whose military has invaded or destroyed much of Israel. The name is a reference, and here's one for you eschatological types. The name is a reference to the biblical Israelite judge Samson, who pushed apart the pillars of a Philistine temple, bringing down the roof and killing himself and thousands of Philistines who had captured him, crying out, "Let me die with the Philistines." So it's, scorched earth. It's if we got to go, everybody goes down with us, essentially. Now, Israel has 400 nuclear weapons. How many nuclear weapons are they going to receive in response? Iran has a very large conventional arsenal, but Israel will wipe them off the map if they feel the need to. And the question is, how is the world going to respond to that? My thoughts are not good. Because while you may have a disproportionate amount of force, if you do not show compassion, and this is what the Russians knew, and this is why they've been so slow to execute this plan that they've been trying to execute there, they know that if you just start indiscriminately targeting people, irrespective of civilian casualties, the rest of the world will remember that. Even your allies are going to remember that. And while it might win you a fast battle, in the long run, you're going to create way more enemies. So it's tactical, but it's not strategic at all. The indiscriminate killing of civilians is not strategic. So even if you were hardline, pro-war Israeli military, and you supported every talking point on the issue on that side of the argument, even if you were that, you would not want to have, you would want to minimize, you would want to absolutely minimize the amount of casualties. Now, Hamas continues to fire rockets on a daily, in some cases hundreds, if not thousands, which is insane to me. So they too want a conflict. They too want this, okay? Somebody is calling for this. Somebody wants a broader war in the region. And like I said, rising tides raise all ships. When it comes to war, it benefits politicians who are currently at the helm of their societies on all sides. So if the Iranian government's popularity is low, it's going to go up. If Biden's popularity is low, it's going to go up. All of these people who are criticizing Biden for the Ukraine war are suddenly riding his you-know-what. It's amazing to me how all the people who were joking about Biden just a week or so ago are now literally kissing his ass with every single Twitter post. It's insane. So it's a very quick way to get people off your back. And the same is true for Netanyahu, although from what I'm told, his popularity is still quite low. So he's got himself in a little bit of a pickle as well. As I was saying at the beginning of this video, Hamas and ISIS are two different things. Hamas actually view them, or ISIS views them, as apostates. They claim that Hamas renounces certain principles of the religion and doesn't follow it in the way that they're supposed to, okay? So just remember that when you hear claims like Hamas is ISIS. Hamas is bad, Hamas is vile. The acts that they've committed are absolutely unforgivable, and they should be met with, violence. That's the only way to deal with a situation like that. But they're not the same thing. So, that's all there is to it. Now, on the topic of Russia has basically said to Israel today on a phone call with Netanyahu, the obligatory phone call, he said that they're for a two-state solution. And of course, Netanyahu denied this. At the same time, you have Russia, Syria, and Russian and American forces fighting inside of Syria, okay? You also had another article that was released today. This is something that's been known for some time. This is a policy of the Russians, but now they're reiterating it again for some reason, which makes me think things are about to heat up in Ukraine once again. Russian Foreign Ministry, Western commercial satellites could be destroyed if used to assist Ukraine in the war. Of course, he's talking about Starlink. But the problem with Starlink is there's so many of those satellites, it's not very cost effective to shoot them down unless you have a very cheap, economical means of doing so. It's not easy to shoot down satellites. The Russians can do it. They've done it. In fact, that's what preceded this war in Ukraine. But it's not something that comes cheap. It's going to cost you a lot more than it cost Starlink to put up more satellites, okay? A Russian fighter also intercepted an American RQ-4B Global Hawk drone over the Black Sea. Once again, it was getting way too close to Sevastopol. We have Latvia, who is continuing with its Russophobic policies. blocking the only land route to Russia for Ukrainian citizens. They've also, I believe they're also doing forced deportations of some Russians now, if I'm not mistaken. Zelensky had his visit to Israel rejected, which is funny because Biden just had his approved. Now, that might be obvious, but that's interesting, isn't it? That is very interesting. Now, as we know, Zelensky has Jewish roots as well, so I don't know where he factors into this whole thing in terms of his, whether or not he's a dual citizen to Israel or not. I don't know his background, but I find that to be, and the fact that the media had publicized it in the way that they did, it's strange. And, if you're Ukrainian, you got to be asking yourself right now, when you're seeing what's happening, are they throwing us under the bus? Now, don't get me wrong, I do not think they are. I just think that they're trying to put out this fire because they know if this fire blows up in the Middle East, then they're in big, big trouble in Ukraine, which they already are in trouble. I think they're just trying to get Ukraine to bide their time right now until they can hopefully address this issue. It may well be that they don't want a war in this region, but to me, that's doubtful. At this point in time, it's almost as if they need more wars to keep all these guys in power. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, guys. I'm just trying to make sense of this. But I'm telling you, man, I got a real, real bad feeling. A very, very bad feeling. It seems like this stuff just comes in waves. They throw us this little bone of hope. Oh, Biden's going to Israel. It's going to be all okay now. But you got to think a couple steps ahead, okay? Military contractor stocks have skyrocketed since the Israeli war started. China today aggressively intercepted a Canadian Armed Forces plane that was flying in international waters, but it was flying just outside of China. Now you got to ask yourself, if China was flying warplanes just outside of our coast, like off of Vancouver or something, but it was international waters, do you think we'd have something to say about that? Do you think that would be an international crisis that we would have to immediately go to DEFCON 2? You bet your ass it would. So this is just the double standards that got us into this problem in the first place. And yeah, clown world, the United States is ready to work constructively with Russia on the full implementation of New START, as well as a new nuclear arms control mechanism that will replace it, said the permanent representative of the USA at the Conference on Disarmament. Now, because the United States just recently released their strategic posture report, and now they're calling for the need to prepare for a full-scale nuclear war with the Russians and the Chinese that could break out at any time, it is very unlikely that the New START agreement in its current form, with the amount of warheads that are provided and the amount of deployment systems, is going to be what's proposed. It's likely going to be a massive increase in the amount of warheads, provisions for testing, provisions for the development of new deployment mechanisms, and that's the only way. And the Russians, are they going to abide by it? Probably no. At this point in time, nobody trusts us. Why would you trust anything the United States has to say at this point? When I say us, we're tethered to that sinking ship as well. Us being Canada. Pakistan's nuclear weapons. Nawaz Sharif's son-in-law warns Israel over a fight against Hamas. Now, I probably should have put this story first, because this is one that slipped under the radar for most people. Pakistan's nuclear weapons are not only for Pakistan, but for all Muslims. Pakistan is, as far as we know, the only nuclear-armed nation, Muslim nation, with the exception of Turkey, but they don't necessarily own those nukes. Those are the United States nukes that are currently parked in Turkey, if they're even still there. For all we know, they're not even there anymore. In light of everything that's been going on, I wouldn't be surprised if they are moved. But with the exception of possibly Iran, who maybe has had some stuff shared with them from the North Koreans and the Russians, it's very likely that Pakistan is the only known Muslim, predominantly Muslim nation that is aligned loosely with some of these other countries on the axis of evil that has nuclear weapons. Pakistan Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif's son-in-law, Captain Swafter, has asked the people in the country to get ready for the jihad and back the Muslims in Palestine. He also said that Pakistan's nuclear weapon was not only for Pakistan, but for all Muslims. He then warned Pakistan's atom bomb is not only for this country, but for all Muslims. He further asked the crowd to get ready for a global jihad. A global jihad. Wow, that sounds like fun. Time to get some weapons, guys. This is just an email I got that is loosely related to the last story. And I'm not going to spill too much, but this guy was in a flight crew for a foreign ministry in Saudi Arabia at between a certain time frame that I'm not going to give because I don't want to provide any information that would in any way compromise this individual. But he said that he was told, after having several late night talks with various Saudi leaders, because, of course, part of the flight crew, right? Which is plausible. I mean, people get to drinking on a plane, loose lips sink ships. I was told that the Saudis paid for the research and development of the Pakistani nuclear weapons program. The quid pro quo was that the Saudis, if they ever needed the weapons, they would be made available. So technically, the Saudis do have nuclear weapons. And let's face it, the Saudis have so much money. If there's anybody who could get some nukes under the radar, it's absolutely them, okay? So, we're going to war, and it's going to be ugly. And again, I must reiterate, this is not a time for panic. I'm amazed that many people are more concerned about the prospect of a global war emerging from the Middle East than they were from the war that has been preoccupying our television screens for the last 18 months. I'm surprised because the one in Europe actually does have the potential to drag us into a mutually assured destruction scenario. The amount of steps that we would have to take to get the Middle Eastern one to Mad Max are more numerous. But I think because of religious reasons, there's a lot more people who believe they have a dog in this fight. And it's going to be interesting to see. I just hope that cooler heads prevail, but I don't put anything on hope, and that's why I am a prepper. Please let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. And if you have any information that you would like to share, I'm not talking about prophecy and things of that nature. I'm more interested in actual data that might be off the radar, and if it's something that you're seeing in your neck of the woods. I'm just getting tons of emails right now about military activity. Everybody is sending me emails about heightened military activity, which is not at all surprising. Okay, you got so many aircraft carriers on the move, you got troops being deployed, you're gonna see a lot of that. And we were already at a higher DEFCON level as a result of what happened earlier in the year with the Chinese balloon row and, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war that, yes, expect a lot of recruitment ads to grace the screens coming to a theater near you soon. My friends, take care. Stay strong. Don't panic, but prep with urgency. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.